Hello and welcome everyone to the fourth and last panel of this workshop. The title of the panel is Challenges in Securing mHealth Infrastructure, and this is where we're going to talk about all the issues about security and privacy surrounding mHealth. My name is Andrés Molina-Markham, and I'm a postdoc here at Dartmouth College. So I'll give a very short introduction to the subject, just pointing out a few issues related to security and privacy. And then our panelists are going to give a short presentation, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. So throughout the day, we've heard many examples that illustrate the potential of mHealth to help individuals. And some of them have to do with the potential of mHealth to reach more people, also to reach people more often, and often in circumstances that were not available before. So some examples include maternal and newborn health monitoring, weight loss, and managing chronic conditions like diabetes. And also we have a whole panel on behavioral healthcare. So what that means is that we're seeing an explosion of devices that not only are being developed, but also are available to consumers, and some examples include ECG and heart rate, respiration rate monitors, also glucose meters, and a range of activity trackers that have exploded in the last year or so. So some of the issues related to privacy that come with these technologies is that because they're with individuals most of the time, they have the potential to gather information that is potentially sensitive. And there's a blurry line between what can be shared and what shouldn't be shared. And that blurry line is not only on the side of individuals who use these technologies as persons who try to improve their well-being, but also physicians who, during their work hours, use tablets or smartphones in the office, and also outside the offices when they're receiving messages from individuals and potentially given advice. So another challenge that comes from these technologies is that devices are becoming very diverse in terms of capabilities. For instance, here we have a picture of a sensor that is used to monitor the temperature of a baby. And the capabilities of that device are very different from those of a device that is used to monitor a cardiac information from a patient, and also they're very different from other devices that are not particularly designed for mHealth, which include tablets and smartphones. So in addition to the diversity of capabilities of devices, we have also a diversity of wireless technologies to connect all these devices. We have Wi-Fi, we have wireless technologies that allow you to upload information via your cell phone network. And then you have personal area network technologies like Bluetooth and ANT+, and not to mention technologies that are slightly different, such as RFID. So this diversity in technologies and in devices poses a problem when we're trying to figure out who is the adversary and how do we protect this infrastructure. So with that, I'm just going to pass it on to our three panelists today, and they're going to give you a short talk with the view, and then we'll open the questions. So first, we have Yih-Chun, who is an associate professor at the Department of Electrical Computing Engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And his interest range in mobile systems and security issues of wireless networks. Mac user.
Hi. So I was asked when Andrés invited me to the panel to talk about a few things, the first of which was who is the adversary. So I'd like to dig back a little bit into the history books and ask who is the adversary in other important systems that we've built and encountered, and now we understand much better, having already built them. Because if we're going to endeavor to build an mHealth system, then we should try to foresee the types of threats that we'll face and use those to inform our concepts of who the adversary might be. So in 1991, just before I started being an undergrad, there was this thing coming underway called the NSFNet. And many of you use a successor network to the NSFNet. You may have heard of it. It's called the Internet. So when the NSFNet was developed, it was a small collection of research networks. You weren't allowed to send anything commercial over them. And so everything was considered to be trusted, and the protocols didn't really consider security very much. So you see up here a little graph of NSFNet back in '91. Of course, today we know that lots of bad things happen on the internet, and we know that part of the reason for that is because the protocols were never designed to be particularly secure from the very beginning. And in fact, if you think about the way that security has been deployed in the internet, it's largely because something bad has happened, and then we wanted to do something about it, so we developed a protocol that mostly works, and then we patched it up. So I would suggest that this is not the way that we want to design systems, especially safety of life systems. Another example is the power grid. So the power grid originally was you'd build a power plant or a collection of power plants, you'd connect up your cities, and then people realized, well, it's nicer to average our load over more households, so we can start doing interconnection. If one power plant starts to fail or it has some problems, then we can shift the loads to the other ones in the region, and so these networks of power grids continue to get larger and larger, and we got these large interconnections. There's a blackout some years ago that was caused in part by the lack of robustness here. And I think over the past decade, people have realized that the smart grid has a number of vulnerabilities because originally it was designed for this trusted group of people, just power engineers and people who worked on power systems. So in fact, if you spend much time around the cyber physical system smart grid people, you'll find out that for a long time, all of the equipment, all of the power equipment in a region would have the same password. And the reason why is because I might work for one power company, and we might go and send out workers to help another power company. And of course, it would be very difficult if we had to keep these huge lists of what all the passwords were. So we just all use the same password, whether it's my company or your company. And so if I need to do work on your company's stuff, I'll just log in using our common password, and everything will be fine because there are no bad people who wear hard hats and work on power things. And then, of course, we'd like to remotely administer these things, so let's just connect them up to modems. It's easy to get a phone line over here. We'll connect up a modem. Oh, there's this newfangled thing called the internet. Maybe we'll plug in some devices into that. So eventually, people realized that all of this was not going in a very good direction, and so they're starting to work on retrofitting the power grid to solve some of these problems, and hopefully nothing really bad will happen in the meantime. Between now and when we get things finally figured out. So healthcare information actually is perhaps of greater consequence than some of the other information that goes over the internet or like power metering information. So we should really think about what kinds of things can be inferred from all of the things that we do related to mobile health. Yesterday, there was a question that was asked about if you look at SMSs related to mobile health, what kinds of things can you learn? I thought that was a really interesting question, and in fact, if you look at healthcare information as it's disclosed, it reveals a lot of information. So I'll give an anecdote from a local hospital. So I live in a small college town, Urbana-Champaign, And a couple days ago, we had a student, his girlfriend brought him in because he had some stomach pain. It turned out that he had appendicitis, so they decided that they were going to operate on him. So before operation, of course, they need to know if there's anything that's going to cause complications in the operation. So they ask him, do you have any other physical problems? He's like, no, I'm perfectly healthy. And then they ask him, so what, are you taking any drugs, any medication? And he's like, yeah, I take acyclovir. So the MDs in the room know what's going on. And so this doesn't make any sense because he's supposedly healthy and he's taking this antiviral drug. And after a couple of weird glances at him and like, this doesn't add up, they were about to throw the girlfriend out of the room and ask him again when he finally confessed that yes, he has genital herpes. So obviously he didn't want to make that known to the people in the room. And yet a little piece of information which he obviously knew could be important, once he disclosed that, then there were inferences that could be made about what other conditions he might have. I realized this morning also that Google might have weird suspicions about me because I Googled for acyclovir as I was preparing for this little blurb, just to kind of look at the mechanisms of action and so forth. So I'm sure Google learns a lot of information about people's health. If you use Gmail, for example, and they have all your email, whatever you Google for, if you're searching for certain drugs, for certain diagnoses and certain symptoms, there's a lot of information that can be learned. And one of the questions we should ask is when we're using an information provider, whether it be a cloud provider that aggregates information that comes out of our mobile health devices or even just generic internet services like Google, let's suppose that the information providers run everything correctly. They don't try to do anything to extract additional information out of you, but they just try to infer health information from it. This is the so-called honest but curious model. And it's clear that large information providers can get a lot of information. So this is Google Flu Trends, which has already been raised earlier. And I think it's a little bit naive to think that we shouldn't consider the honest but curious adversary because an attacker that breaks into the system and gets a bunch of data is going to have at least as much power as the honest but curious attacker. So clearly this is something that we should think about in terms of mobile health information storage. This is just a little collection of news articles about bad things that have happened on the internet that I collected for another purpose. But if we're going to store this information on the internet, and it makes a lot of sense to store this information on the internet because smartphones are going to be connected to the internet. It's a great central place to store information and retrieve information and do analysis. But if we're going to store information on the internet, and we don't really have a good story for securing the devices that they're stored on, then maybe we'll face some attackers who are even less honest but equally curious. So perhaps we even need to defend against these types of situations. So to deal with this an honest but curious attacker, you've got to do something about how you store your data. To deal with a less honest and equally curious attacker, you have to do something about how you transmit your data. I was going to say okay. So before I get into talking about what I've done, and I'll keep that part short, I want to mention that I think that one of the big problems that we haven't really addressed here in the mobile health community, and I think it's something that the security community and clinicians and ethicists and so forth need to sit down and talk about, which is how do we decide who should have access to which devices? So if you think about data, access is, it could be privacy compromising, but perhaps it won't kill anyone if somebody gets that information. But then you're having increasing number of medical devices that actually can do actuation with the human body. So when we talk about both data and we talk about actuation potential of devices, who should have access? we could just say, well, my doctor should have access. But perhaps my doctor is not around. Perhaps my doctor got hit by a bus. Perhaps my doctor is vacationing in a foreign country. So then you might say, well, I'm going to allow all doctors to have access. But the trouble with letting all doctors have access is that I could probably find a country that will sell me a medical degree, and suddenly I can get a certificate that says I'm a doctor, and you probably don't want to trust me with your data or your devices. And then you could say, well, I'm an American. I trust the U.S. The U.S. Board of Medical Examiners, and I trust our certification procedure. I don't want to talk about the difficulties of that. But even if you suppose that this is all good, I still have the problem that I might be traveling in a foreign country where I don't have access to a board-certified doctor, an American board-certified doctor. And then what? And these are difficult questions because if you have an implantable device and somebody who shouldn't have access has access, that's clearly bad. And at the same time, if somebody doesn't have access who should have access, then you wind up in a situation where you're going to be needlessly operated upon because nobody has permission to use your device the way that it's supposed to be used. And so physical access is going to be needed. So anyways, I think that this question of authorization, audit, access control, these are questions that I have not seen good answers to. And I think this is something the community really needs to come together and think about. Now I'm way over on time, so maybe I won't talk too much about this. I'll share the problem and not the solution. So this is actually how I got into this area. I read a number of pieces of work that said we can decide that two nodes are on the same body and we can share a key together because they all share this common electrical signal, which is the heart-generated electrocardiogram signal. And there are actually 4 papers here that all use this electrocardiogram signal. And some of them even show that you can get enough entropy. And the way they show that is they grab this 12-lead ECG from a hospital and they say, look, there's enough entropy here. The trouble is that the signal that comes out of the heart emanates through the heart through this galvanic propagation. And so there are lines of potential. And the way that you want to do your measurement is you want to measure at 2 points that have maximally different potentials. It turns out also that if you make a measurement from 2 points that are on the same line, then you're going to get 0 information because none of the heart signal is actually going to create a potential between those 2 points. Also, once these lines get sparse, you're not going to get a whole lot of information. And so, for example, at the wrist, there's not much to be measured. So the other thing is that information about the heart is actually visible outside of the body. So we said we wanted to share a key among devices that are on a body. That means that we need this secret to not be measurable outside of the body. The problem is you can get an iPhone app that will allow you to measure your heart rate. It turns out that just with a video of your face, you can learn information about your pulse. And finally, if you actually do the measurements of ECG signals on various points of the body, in some areas, such as the wrist and the ankle, you don't get very good information. And so somebody with a video of your face may actually have better information than a sensor that's on your wrist. So the point I want to take away from this is that when we're trying to build security solutions or any solutions for mobile health, we need to have some idea of what the underlying physiological process is, and we also have to have some idea about what can be measured outside of the body to make sure that any of this stuff is actually going to work. And so I see I'm way over time, so I'll get out of the way.
Next we have Jaeyeon Jung, researcher at Microsoft at Redmond. Her prior work includes a Taintroid that resulted in widespread media coverage, including CNET, BBC, and Wired. Her current research focuses on new mechanisms to improve consumer privacy through information flow analysis and usable user interface design.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't work in the area of health, but in the past like 4 or 5 years, I spent like past 4 or 5 years in investigating sort of privacy issues with mobile applications. And so today I'd like to share some of the lessons that I found valuable from my studies. And I hope that you will find those useful when you design your cool mobile health applications. Okay, let me try this. Okay, so this is a snapshot of a application store. I think one thing that you maybe did not know is that even in the Windows Phone marketplace, there are more than 120,000 applications. And a new content is being added at a rate of a couple of hundred apps a day. So it's amazing. What's the problem? Unfortunately, this marketplace is polluted with applications that are collecting data about users without proper disclosure and covertly. So these are a few examples. Probably some of you are using maybe some of these apps, so maybe you want to pay attention to this. So Pandora is a very popular streaming application, music streaming application, and it was found to share users' information such as demographic information, location, and phone ID with various third parties. And LinkedIn, that's the second app, is a LinkedIn app, and right after, I think the day after, the LinkedIn password leak incident, another researcher and a set of researchers found out that LinkedIn app, mobile app, was transmitting meeting notes on users' calendar without any sort of good reasons. And then why is it important? Meeting notes, in the company, usually we use this Outlook to set up meetings, and we put sort of the breach, passcode, and all this stuff there. So it could be sensitive. And then the third application is Path, social networking application. And this application was found to upload the entire iPhone contact of the user's phone by default. And this is interesting because the Path, the company, they position themselves as a sort of privacy-aware alternative of Facebook. Right. So I remember after this incident, the CEO quickly apologized, and then they claimed that they fixed this. Okay, but the problem is, there are lots of applications, and then including those privacy violating applications. But the problem is currently burden is on users to protect their privacy. So these are notorious permission prompts. So when users download an application and then they have to sort of agree to these permission prompts, and then that's the only kind of way that they can protect themselves from privacy violating applications. Then what's the problem with this? So the prompt architecture, all this that is currently out there, kind of assume that we expect users to make informed privacy decisions, right? But then can we? So we did a couple of studies, and then this one is our most recent studies. And so kind of high level, what we did was we built a kind of dashboard type of application called Privacy Leaks that sort of in real time monitors what kind of personal data that application is collecting and sharing with other remote servers, and then display back to users. And so after we built this interface, we did a lab study. So I'll talk a little bit about lab study and what we found. So we wanted to find out whether this kind of interface really helped users better understand about what applications are doing with their data. So this is the methodology that we used. So we recruited people, about 19 participants, and then we told them that, this is about playing games, mobile games. And then your job is to, and then when they came to our lab, we told them that your job is to compare 2 mobile games, Angry Birds and then another game similar to Angry Birds. And then we asked them to pick a friend or family member that they want to evaluate this game for. So, and then we said, after they played each game a couple of times for a couple of minutes, we asked them which game you like more, and then what kind of reviews they want to write in the application marketplace if they want to, and so on. And then the interesting part is the second part, right? And and then what we did was, let me just show you the next screen. So this is the screenshot of these two games. One is the Angry Birds. Probably you might have played this game, very popular game. And then the other one is Toss It. This is similar. You just use this gesture to fly this crumble of paper, but there's a fan blowing in, so you have to sort of angle it right to put it in the trash. Okay. And then after they had fun with these games, and then we sort of asked them a bunch of decoy questions, and then we asked this question. So what information do you think was leaving the phone, right? And the response is like this. So 5 out of 19 participants, they said, oh, they never thought about data sharing before, right? So they're like, oh, what did you just ask, right? What? So they thought that, when they downloaded an app, the app should be just something that runs on the phone. It shouldn't communicate with anything outside. And then about 8 out of 19 people, they said, oh, so applications. So when we asked this question, they sort of certainly started thinking about this, and they said, oh, maybe these applications may send some data to the developer. The Angry Birds, probably they want to collect some stats about this game score and where the user is and so on. But they didn't think that the Angry Birds might share some of users' data with third parties. And then there's 6 out of 19 people who were kind of better informed. They said, oh, these applications, they knew that, they have sometimes they see some advertising, so probably these games will share data with third parties. So I guess the takeaway from this is that the users have various expectations. Okay, and then the second part of the study was that we gave them a phone with this privacy leaks sort of dashboard, and then asked them to play these games again to reevaluate. And then let me see. Okay, so then the privacy leaks dashboard, the application, it has this dashboard part, but it also has this just-in-time notification parts. So this one is, so the thing is, people don't, because they don't think about this when they are interacting with the applications. We need to somehow remind them of what's happening. So what we did was we designed this privacy notification when it happens right away, so that user can get some subtle feedback when it happens. So one sort of notification we designed is this toast in the notification bar. So this little thing, I don't think I can. Right. So this little thing up there, but sometimes the application uses full screen. So in that case, we use sort of other modalities. One is like water leak sound. Since we sort of call our application privacy leaks, we use this water dropping sound. So whenever the data goes off to data leaves your phone, there's a water leak sound. And then the third modality that we used was vibration. So the phone vibrates a little bit whenever your data leaves. And then this, the dashboard part. So we used a very sort of simple design because, many studies show that people don't want to read these long, text privacy notice and whatnot. So we just use a very simple tabular format. And then only one thing that's kind of code that we use was this color for this number of leaks. So the more the leak, the brighter the red the color. And then if you click one of those apps, you can see what are the destinations that this particular application shared your data with. So for instance, this Toss It application has shared the user's location with @will.com, and then Florida.com. And this is advertising server, and this is the developer server, and then that's analytics server. So that the users can kind of get a feel of what's happening with the data. Okay, and then after this, we asked people questions again. So what do you think about this? And then why do you think that this is happening? And it's very interesting. So the group, the first group who never thought about this, was really struggled to understand ramifications. And then even like one person said, oh, I guess they could sell my phone ID to different sources, then I could get the equivalent of spam on my phone or virus. So that's not true, but they're kind of assuming the worst, so which is bad. And then the second group of people, they were, since they didn't think of this third-party sharing, they were surprised by all these different destinations that their data was spreading to. But the interesting part is even the group of people who sort of understood this, what the kind of reality, they were surprised by this frequent and wide sharing. I mean, we have lots of sort of analysis of this data from this study, but kind of one takeaway is, so this is a qualitative study, so we don't make any sort of general conclusions out of it. But 15 out of 19 participants in this kind of bar chart said, I guess 16 out of 19 participants said that information provided by these applications is useful. And then they just wanted it right away on their phone. Okay, so the point that I wanted to make with this study, so sharing this result from this study is that rather than this question, like can we expect users to make informed privacy decisions, we need to think about this. Can we really help users to make better privacy decisions? And then what kind of mechanism we can use? And in this study, we use this notification mechanism, but maybe in your health applications, you may have some other ideas. And then second, this one will be very brief. So I've been also building lots of tools and systems to analyze existing applications to see what's really happening, how this program behaves and stuff. And then the question that so I wanted to explore is, can we really expect application developers to meet privacy policies? And if you look at these application app stores, they have some privacy guidelines. They ask application developers to comply with certain guidelines. And the question is, can you really, does it really happen? So to answer this question, we built this tool called Prescreen. And I'll just show you a few slides about this. So the problem is the currently existing privacy analysis is all manual. These application developers or someone in the marketplace, they just look at this application behavior and then maybe look at some source code, and then they sort of make a ad hoc decision about this. So as a result, we found these problems. So in one application marketplace, one of the rules is, if your application collects location and then shares location with third parties, you have to get this consent, opt-in consent first. So we looked at 3 different applications that does that. So that shares location data with third parties. And then the first application, you see this consent prompt, right? And then we did code analysis, and found out that yes, so whenever user says cancel, then the data is not collected. But the second app that we looked at, even if you say cancel, the data gets collected and then shared with third parties. And then the third application, they don't even show consent prompt. But so these are clearly violating a policy, but they're still sort of slipped through. So what we did was, so with this colleague at MSR, so we built a static analysis tool to automatically find these violations. And we also find a way to sort of automatically fix this by binary rewriting. So the point that I wanted to make here is that the question that we wanted to ask is not this, but how can we help developers with privacy testing tools? Because they are overwhelmed, and then the privacy compliance is it's not something that it's not on their top priority. They really need help, like with this automated analysis and stuff. Okay, so to wrap up, so I really believe that for kind of privacy is kind of a very fuzzy thing, but one thing that I think you want to think about when you design your application is that, so think about users' expectations, and then think about what your application is actually doing, and then find the way to reduce the gap. And probably you can do that by doing user studies and all these things, but this is really important. And then secondly, like I said, this automated testing is very important. And then and the third thing is, currently there's a problem with these permissions that are really sort of permissive, really permissive than necessary. So there's a question of designing permissions with least privacy privilege. Okay, thank you.
Last, we have Sorber, who is an assistant professor at Clemson University. And his research makes embedded systems and sensors more efficient, secure, and better able to deal with uncertainty and unpredictable environments.
You all hear me? Okay. So I'm Jacob Sorber. It's great to be here. I wanted to start off with I've got a confession to make that this is the security panel and mHealth security, but I'm a fairly newcomer to both security and to mHealth for that matter. And so really, my research really is focused on how to make computing work better under uncertainty. When you have uncertain environments with very tight constraints, different resource constraints, and those constraints vary over time. And that I think sort of frames how I look at security. I also, as I was thinking about it, hearing the discussions earlier and hearing people talk about whether or not we look at an individual and we think we see a person or we see a patient, and I was thinking, coming from my own background, probably when I look at anything carrying a sensor, I usually see it as more of a turtle. So this is my background. My first uncertain environment was turtles. I went around gluing tracking devices to turtles, or tortoises, I guess, to be technical. And it turns out that computing on the back of a tortoise, you have a lot of energy management problems and resource management problems. It's very challenging and a lot of fun. And of course, I'm not just stuck on turtles. I also, all kinds of things. I stick stuff on mongooses, water mains, bridge piers. All of these things have their own types of uncertainty. They have their own individual challenges. And so a lot of what I do has to do with energy and resource management under these kind of environments. And this is a security panel, so that's all I'm going to say about these. If anyone wants to talk about energy afterwards, though, that's the other thing I like to talk about. But so of course, eventually, with all this tracking and sensing and uncertain environments, eventually I was going to start tracking people. And people are an interesting species because they, unlike tortoises, they happen to, there are all these different things they want to collect. They collect all this data, but they also have these weird privacy and security issues. Tortoises are easy. They don't care if you monitor what they eat or their mating behavior or any of this stuff. That's just people are just weird about that stuff. So anyway, so I came to Dartmouth 3 years ago as a postdoc, and so got involved in a bunch of this work and specifically found mobile health to be really interesting from a security perspective for a couple of reasons. One of them is that the stakes are very high. Unlike if my turtle tracking device fails, nobody gets too upset except me. It's a pain, but in this case we're looking at failures or attacks or whatever happens. The consequences can be misdiagnosis. You may mistreat the patient. You can cause, some of the other speakers referred to, causing physical harm or violations of privacy. People get all bent out of shape. The other thing that's really interesting to me, though, is that it seems like healthcare is moving outside of the clinic, which was this safe zone where it didn't matter if we didn't really know how to build secure systems because it all happened in this little box. And now with mHealth, it's moving out. And it's wherever. It's happening out there in the world, and so there are all of these questions about who the device was actually attached to, who collected it, how it was collected, and so there's all of this uncertainty, there's a need for new technical approaches to answering some of these questions. And to make matters really bad, now we also, these are often wearable devices that we're carrying with us. We've seen some examples of continuous tracking devices. And now you have very tight resources. And so the time when you really need the crypto and the processing and all this context-aware computing is a time when, sorry, because your battery runs out, and that might be just as, you might as well have gotten hacked and had someone break your device or something, because you have no energy, so you can't do anything. So, again, you see the turtle tracking comes back. It's all about resources. But this really got me interested. And so, specifically, in my time as an mHealth security researcher, I just want to give a quick overview of two of the projects that I've worked on. And here's just one line of each, and I'll expand a little bit. One was called Plug and Trust, and the idea was, we were looking at the problem of malware on smartphones. So we've had how many people show the picture of who owns a smartphone, and the smartphone's awesome, we're all using smartphones. Well, malware on smartphones happens to be catching on too, and that's great, except now that we're bringing all this nice, sensitive, safety-critical data onto these phones. And so one of the projects that we've worked on is, how can we build a trustworthy computing environment on a device that may have malware on it, that may be compromised? Maybe, I guess we can say it's joined the dark side at a place called SITH, right? So in this case, the name refers to, we built a system using a very little pluggable smart card that you can plug into phones. And so if I don't trust my phone, I could just plug a smart card. And this is actually a bad example because this one doesn't have a card slot, so it can't take one. But if I had an Android phone, then I could plug in this device, which it's basically a little crypto-enabled computer. And we can use that to build a confidential and verifiable computing environment on this phone, so that any malware on the phone, actually, it can't figure out what the values of the data are that you're processing. And if it does anything to tamper with that data, it can be verified on the back end. And so that was, the only weakness right now is that the communication channel between the phone and the card is very slow. And so that's a problem that we're waiting for the manufacturers to fix, because it's an arbitrary problem. It's not a fundamental issue that needs to be there. It just is. The second, so the second project is one that is still in the early stages. It's called Amulet, and it's really looking at the whole management of a body area network. So I have a bunch of different sensor devices, and maybe I've got a smartphone that's helping provide connectivity to the internet. Maybe I have another device. We envision another possibly wristwatch style device that helps provide some trust management, helps provide, I'm trying to remember who mentioned it earlier, talking about the need for some of the glue that brings all these devices together and makes it easier to plug things together. Well, the idea is to make it easier for a application designer or a system designer to not have to worry about all the security details, but to actually build secure programs in a way that isn't impossible. Because as we've seen, anyone that you look around in the news, we don't have to look very far to see that it's very hard for programmers to build secure systems using using the current approach of doing things. Even websites, which aren't particularly difficult to secure compared to an mHealth system with all of these other constraints, we still get ourselves into trouble all the time. And so really, the point and the goal of this work, I'm not going to dive into any of the technical details, but is to rethink the computing ecosystem, to make it easier to build these safe and privacy-preserving applications, and either eliminate or mitigate the effects of several threats. And I've listed a bunch here. I tend to look at threats on a much broader scale. So things like software bugs. Obviously you have malware and malicious attacks, but also things like what happens when a piece of hardware fails? They do. Can we detect it? Can we keep that from causing problems? What happens when someone misuses a device? They just don't know how to use it. Well, there's an attack, there's a threat. And so these are the different things that I'm looking at and I'm interested in solving. And and really the overarching goal is to make it easy to build safe systems, because I don't think we can rely on every application programmer to do all of this themselves and to get it all right. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess at this point, we would open the room for questions. Does anybody have a question for the panel?
There's an interesting debate going on that has been resolved one way up till now, but it's going on as to who owns the data to begin with. So who gets to decide from which to, presumably who gets to decide who gets to see the data. And if you have today's system, people say, well, it is the patient's data, but they've decided that we can't see it. So we don't, in fact, control the data. The hospital has one hospital has the data, another hospital I went to has the data, doctors have data, and other people have data, and I can't get it. If, however, I controlled the data and the system was set up with going to the choices that you were giving us, saying, okay, I'll share with any doctor who treats me. Okay, I'll share with a health worker who comes to see me. That would seem to be a pretty straightforward way to address some of these issues. Now, how you enforce that is a whole other kind of issue that you guys were addressing. But at least from the rights perspective, is that something that you or others in the room have gotten into as to kind of where we start with the ownership here?
That's a great question. I think in some cases you don't quite choose who you're seeing. If you wind up in the emergency department, you don't really get a whole lot of choices about which doctor you're seeing. I think another problem is that, so right now under HIPAA you are actually able to get a number of your medical records. But there are some medical records that we actually don't want in the hands of the patients, in particular psych records. So I think those also need to kind of come under the question of who has access to them. And then these are just the records. How about the actuation of the devices themselves? And how do I prove that I am currently the person treating you? In other words, is there any what things can I prove electronically that will differentiate somebody standing next to you from the doctor who is treating you?
I'll add one comment on the usability issue of these prompts. So the thing is, if users perfectly understand what they are consenting to, that solves the problem, I think. But the problem is, at least in the current system, like iPhone, Windows Phone, and Android device, studies have shown that people do not understand. They just click yes, and then later they get upset and so on. And then it's not just a problem of users not understanding this, but also sort of people who designed this, they didn't really come up with the right terms that users can understand and then make the right choice. So I think so there's an issue of usability of these prompts, but I can say that once you figure out that, then probably it's one way of giving control to users, giving data flow control to users.
Yeah, so I agree with both of the things that were said previously, but just mostly I'm excited to see how that finally shakes out, because the way we're doing it right now is a mess. But yeah, and you know, you said some people just don't want the data, but it's, and then if you require people to give you access, what does it mean to get access? And that's, I don't know what that means yet.
So I want to follow up on that. Actually, it's a really interesting question to me. It has been puzzling me for a long time. How do we allow people to make informed decisions about what information is collected about them, who has access to it, and what they're allowed to do with it? And as you say, when you ask them, yes or no, may I collect this or share this, most people click yes. So maybe, I'm just throwing this out there, maybe the solution is not to ask yes or no questions. Maybe instead what we should be doing is asking them to answer more complex questions about what they think the application is doing and see if they get it right. Sort of related to what you were trying to do in your study. Now, it's a lot harder, cognitively much harder, but maybe it's necessary if we really want people to recognize what's going on, and then they say, oh, now after 5 tries, I got it right. They're taking my location under these circumstances. Wait a minute, I didn't want that. And then you can ask them, is that okay? Are you really okay with that?
That's a really great comment. Actually, it's kind of people who care about this usability issues, that they come up with creative solutions. Like, one is, why individuals have to, make a similar decision, right? So maybe, if there's some kind of default setting of, I don't know, so like for this particular health application, 80% of people, you made this choice. So maybe this is the right choice for you. Or something like that, so that you can kind of use this kind of collective wisdom to make a better choice. I mean, people are exploring this kind of idea, so that maybe, can to help each other, let people help each other. And then second thing is, that's also very good comment about, how maybe since users are so diverse and their expectations are so different, their level of comprehension, levels of comprehension is so different, maybe the system has to somehow measure the user's level of comprehension and then present the right level of question to them. So there's one study from Balachandra Krishnamurthy at AT&T Research and Krishna Bhumandi at Max Planck, using similar idea to test out how many privacy settings that people did on Facebook were the ones that they actually understood. So they created this thing called privacy IQ. And then what they did was they asked those people to install this app, and then you collected their settings, right? And then they quizzed them. So you made these settings, and then do you know that this setting can do this and this and this and measure? And then they found that a lot of people just didn't know. So yeah, that's all very interesting ideas. People are I think starting to pay more attention to this, but have not. At least I don't know any good solutions.
I think that's a great question. So. The 2 studies, your study as well as the Max Planck study, I think are even too optimistic about the user's ability. Because the set of people whom you recruit are people who are relatively high functioning. Medical students are taught that something like 40% of people are functionally illiterate. And if you're functionally illiterate, I can try to teach you many times through text, what people are doing with your data, or if you say yes, what will the consequences be? But at least maybe for 10% of people, maybe they just have no chance of even understanding. And so maybe the question we should be asking is, what are the defaults? What should the defaults be? Because the defaults perhaps are more likely to drive the average user behavior than these really customized, really deeply understand what's going on here, when all I'm trying to do is play toss it.
So I think these are actually really great conversation, and I think it's highly relevant. I mean, you're saying that you're not particularly focused on, for example, mobile health, but with the Privacy Leaks program, I think that's extremely valuable from a medical point of view. I mean, it's similar to the approach that we have a lot of good medical record systems where you have the audit log as well as the privacy settings and the role-based privacy, so that then the patient can tell who actually looked at their record. And obviously, HIPAA encompasses part of that. But I mean, what you're describing, I think, would be enormously helpful to people. And it's a little bit like having, you know, the sort of credit agency where if you have access to your credit report, you can see if stuff happened that it finally gets to a place where it can hurt you. And so it seems like also that if somebody has, for example, been taking acyclovir because of genital herpes, somehow that information leaks and then it becomes a problem, well, then maybe there's some responsibility on the developers of that app. And if you can say, well, wait a minute, this app actually sent information about my drug regimen for some reason, then, you know, it becomes much easier for people to take control and for the company or the people who are developing these apps to have to take responsibility. It's a little bit like the consumer financial protection stuff, you know, that people don't understand all the details of mortgage, you know, documents. I mean, I think it's really hard for any of us sometimes to go through all the details. So to me, it seems like, especially with the number of apps, that to make it safe, you have to have ways in which people can look and say, oh, this is what this could be doing to me. And maybe you also have just a site where they can see what data leaked from my phone or all these different things. Oh, wait a minute, I don't want that.
But that's a great comment. So actually, the motive, what inspired us to run this study, design this privacy leaks dashboard and stuff, was the previous study that we ran. So we ran a field study. So we recruited 20 people and then had our instrumented phone. So had them use our instrumented phone for 3 weeks. And then we found out that they didn't understand a thing about this, about applications are leaking. And then we built a prototype of this auditing visualization tool. And then, like, a lot of people, even people who don't seem to care so much about their privacy protection, really like this kind of simple way to sort of look at what's happening with their data. And then, so the thing is, people say, oh, they're not going to check on this like every day, or if they say, oh, I'm not paranoid about privacy, but at least, you know, if something happens, I know who I can sort of held accountable for. And I think for maybe, you know, many users, consumers, and patients, maybe that's really important capability to provide.
But I think there's also perhaps a little bit of a policy issue here, because once the information is leaked to one place, it can be re-aggregated somewhere else. There are a lot of people who are doing this kind of thing on the web, and so you may see a lot of apparently harmless leaks, but then when those are combined together somewhere else, then you can have the truly bad stuff happening. And going back to just a log of what happened, it may not be enough for you to figure out exactly why the information eventually got out.
So I work on a little bit of privacy-centric research outside of developing country things, and here is a difficulty I'm facing. And we're looking at social network privacy, and I think I've looked at most of the papers in this space. And we are trying to figure out, for a given piece of information, for a given person, how do you define a rule or a logic to say this particular piece of information leaked actually violates privacy? In other words, we are talking about privacy as a 0-1 thing. And even in health, you look at HIPAA, you can read through HIPAA several times, and there is a whole work by Dawn Song and her students, Adam Barth, on trying to write a contextual integrity framework to map HIPAA rules into verifiable programming logic interfaces and so on. But I think at the heart of it, I as a computer scientist who should know a fair amount about privacy, I'm not able to figure out how to define what is considered private, in what context, for what person. And you know, I'm telling this after going through a fair amount of effort in this space. And yeah, so if you have any thoughts on how to even go about this, that'll be good.
So I think there are 2 aspects, two ways of thinking about this. So one is, like I said in the second half of my talk, so there are some rules, right? So there are in some cases, even for application stores, there are some rules that they're really clear. You know, this is the steps that you need to do when you do this. And these are the things that you can check. And then, you know, if application or whatever Facebook said, if that's, you know, that Facebook application, third-party application is violating this, then that's a clear privacy violation. So there is no question about that. You know, if there's clearly specified rules, and then if there's a way that you can statically or dynamically check that, you know, this program doesn't meet the constraints or the rule, then, you know, there's a violation. But the second thing is, I think that's what you're referring to. It's a little fuzzy. So, so that's what's kind of, that's what's about compliance. But the second part is kind of users, right? So users are, in many cases, they are the ultimate decision makers, right? They need to decide whether they want to trade certain piece of information for a certain piece of services, right? And then that case, I think it's really fuzzy. So to me, and then I think also Bala again, Krishnawati, you know, he sort of defined this term called privilege of a principle of least astonishment, least surprise, if you can measure this. So, I mean, there's one attempt. So the last year's UBCom paper from Carnegie Mellon, so they so measure these expectations of people with respect to what data that this application can collect. So they use crowdsourcing, they use Amazon Mechanical Turk. So the first given application, they measured, you know, what percentage of people expected that this particular application, like Angry Birds, you know, are collecting location data from people. And then they found out that, you know, this level of expectations are very different, right? So for instance, you know, if it's an application that's giving you some location-based services, 90% of people expect that yes, that application will collect location. But, you know, if it's an application that's nothing to do with location, but it's collecting location, you know, so their level, they really don't expect that to happen. So the way that they define the privacy here, from the user's perspective, is that, you know, if the application's behavior deviates far from the user's expectation, then there's a problem. Then how you can communicate that with users and how to do it. I mean, it's a little fuzzy. I'm not sure it's not satisfied your concern, but.
So
It's different in healthcare, right? In healthcare, there's the HIPAA rules. So privacy has a different meaning if it's an app that's transmitting healthcare information.
But even HIPAA is fuzzy.
Sure.
And HIPAA is fuzzy. So I think if you wanted to take it, to take a very hard line, you can say if there's any information theoretical leakage, then it's a privacy violation. In other words, if I can tell from the population of your Facebook posts that the probability that you have disease X differs from the prevalence of disease X in the worldwide community, then perhaps you've leaked some private information. So, for example, if you express interest in a particular medication, then I will have learned some non-zero information about, because in my acyclovir example, for example, there's only a small set of diseases that's really used to cure, and nobody's taking it recreationally. So, so then it leaks a lot of information, right? I can have a much higher, I can assign a much higher probability than in the overall population. The question is, I think that the problem with this is I think it's too strict, because what social scientist researchers have found is that people tend to clump together and they tend to wind up liking similar things, and so people really polarize. And so you might find that a community of diabetics particularly likes drinking Coke, and that's and so the fact that you like Coke on your Facebook page suddenly makes you, 0.1% more likely to have diabetes, or who knows, maybe 10% more likely to have diabetes. So in that sense, it's too strict. But yet it's a clean formal definition that you could make.
So the other thing that I would just add that makes it even messier is if you successfully capture a definition of privacy, if you're dealing with, if a user is seeing their data and working with their data, so Arti can tell you more about this later, but when they actually get in and see what the data looks like, their feelings about privacy will change as they work with the data and as the circumstances change. And when something that they thought was going to be completely innocuous, like sleep patterns, that they see, oh wait, that reveals something about my behavior at 2 a.m., and all of a sudden that privacy set, so however you capture the privacy settings also the user has to be able to reason about it and change it without becoming overwhelmed. And so not only you're capturing something very complicated.
It's like most people care about privacy only when it's violated.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, many of the examples that we've given here today are, you can take innocuous pieces of information and can build a very complete, and that's, none of us could have predicted it. When it happens, we go, whoa, you can do that, and then we feel violated, I guess, right? Then we react to it. So I guess there is no answer here, I don't know, other than HIPAA rules, and that's about it. And best interpretation. Is that a feeling from security researchers, or there is some optimism?
So that's called kind of inference attack, right? So the problem is this inference attack will get better and better over time because big data and data analytics is getting better and better. So probably we cannot enumerate all the things that can be inferred from a certain piece of data. So given that, how can we expect users to make informed decision, right? So we don't know by revealing this data what kind of other information that can be inferred and it could be misused later on. So yes, I agree with you. I'm a little pessimistic, although I spent many years working on this area. I'm a little pessimistic.
Yeah, I think if you look at the field, the history shows that consumers don't care about privacy, consumers don't care about security until their security or privacy is violated. Then they care for a week or two, and then they resume not caring anymore. I don't really know what can be done about it. I think that legislation, regulation is one thing that can somewhat stem the tide.
Like in what way? I mean, or what could be an example of that?
Things like HIPAA, right? So perhaps without HIPAA, you would see, I hear hissing in the background. Perhaps without HIPAA, you would see even more sharing of what's currently protected health information for, I don't know, social purposes or whatever. But perhaps some amount of regulation is helping to stem that.
I actually have one rebuttal to what Yih-Chun just said. So, people often say, oh, consumers don't care about privacy. I think it's really, I don't know, I don't see any, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I mean, some people care about it and some people don't care about it, but I don't think we can in general say that, oh, people don't care about this. And another thing is people are you can nudge people very easily, right? And then one example is this, maybe, okay, so Microsoft recently launched this campaign called Screwball. So I don't know whether any of you have seen this. It's all about sort of using privacy as a differentiator, telling that, oh, Google is doing all sorts of bad things with your data, but Microsoft doesn't. Microsoft products don't do that. And then these people who are running this campaign, actually, well, it turns out that this guy who Microsoft is running this campaign, he was running campaign for the Clemson. So he's a political campaign guy, and then now he's been running this campaign for Microsoft. And then he showed a bunch of data, and then really, this campaign works, So I guess I cannot say that, that proves that people care about privacy. But with this data, I can say that at least with some right messages and right cute ads and stuff, people seem to care about this. And a lot of people signed a petition to tell Google, stop collecting their, stop using their, Gmail content for advertising and stuff.
I would say that in order to be successful, so I think it's easy to get someone to sign a petition, but to get them to change their behavior, quit using Gmail, quit using Google, start using Bing and Hotmail. If people are really doing that, then I would say it's effective. Otherwise, I think it just shows that marketing works, right? And I think marketing works. And then I'll also go back a little bit and say I don't think that people that nobody cares about security or privacy. But what I'll say is that the marketplace generally doesn't. That there are not enough people who refuse to use Google products, for example, to make a dent in Google's desire to collect data.
I think that's remain to be seen. That's my point. So these people running this Google campaign, they are confident that will sort of change this competition a bit.
If I can ask a money question, we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how do you finance modern mHealth related systems at the base of the pyramid. And so if you look to the poor people, that's one source of revenue. You look to the Gates Foundation, that's another source, but that's one we're trying not to look at. But if you look at the people who would pay for data, here are the drug companies paying CVS enormous amounts of money every year to find out exactly which doctors are prescribing which medicines. So data on patient behavior is extremely valuable, and because the systems that we're talking about doing at the base of the pyramid are integrated systems that produce data about people's food and behavior, it's going to be really valuable data. So what we're going to do is sell it to drug companies and make lots of money ourselves and not share it with any, no. I mean, there's, beyond privacy, there's an issue here of who benefits from that. And if people can say, look, my share of that revenue is 0.222%, and I choose to take that in cash, or I choose to contribute to the health system. That's another way of looking at this data. And subject to government rules saying, notwithstanding any of this, you still can't use personal data to market, baby formula to pregnant mothers. I mean, there's some public policy here, but I think we need to add the economic component to this discussion as well, because I may be willing to give away some privacy, but if I understand that I could get paid, then that's a different issue.
There are really nice statistical techniques, though, that allow me to learn almost everything I could in a privacy-compromising way, but I could learn it without compromising privacy. Right? So there are these techniques called differential privacy that mean that no matter how many questions you ask the system, you can't learn very much about me, but you could learn lots of global statistics. And even correlations. So I think that we can have the best of both worlds. We can gain information from the data, and yet we can still retain some amount of individual privacy.
So I have another question. Even if we imagine that consumers can understand the privacy risks, and even if we imagine that the policies are all clear, many privacy and security problems arise from programmers either not understanding the importance of privacy or security, or just plain making mistakes. So what can we do in terms of the mHealth systems to make it more likely that people will build privacy-sensitive, secure systems?
So, I think, personally, I think the biggest key so there have been studies that have gone through and looked at the frequency of bugs in source code, and they seem fairly constant across. So one of the best ways to reduce your number of bugs is reduce the number of lines of code in your program. And so one way that we could approach that is to say, take these areas that are security critical and abstract them out, and so provide a toolbox that's common among that everybody's using, so that we can hopefully test it to death and make sure that it's very, very robust. And then you're writing fewer lines of code. And so then there are fewer opportunities, and hopefully the mistakes that people do make aren't in the security critical components, because those are already in the tested modules.
Right, so I guess I mostly agree with what Jacob said. So I think the two things that we can do, I think it's a kind of similar problem with other software engineering issues to reduce security bugs. So one is, if the platform provides a really sort of less privileged API, or sort of API that developers can easily use to desensitize data, then probably you can reduce chances that they mistakenly leak some data. And the second thing is, this thing is the part that I'm very sort of passionate about, so really building tools that allow this kind of application testing at scale. So I use this both static analysis and dynamic analysis tools. And we use various different techniques. We use information flow tracking, or we use sort of graph analysis to see what part precedes which part, so that we can understand the causality of data acquisition and also on all these things. I think it just makes this program analysis area more interesting. I think that part I'm a little optimistic about.
Well, I have a question. Oh, sorry, what was that? Oh, okay.
Well, one more. I've hear us talking about the security and privacy, and I think I got a feeling a lot of this is just about making people feel good, to make them think it's all safe and all secure, because my issue I'm seeing here is like we're taking care of the apps, you're taking care of the application, but that's just one level of all of the communication that's going on between these devices, from you to back to the server, or wherever the information's going. Do you think, I mean, can we really protect all of our privacy, no matter what the developers are doing? Can we get there where we can actually protect it? Because all I can think of is like my phone. I might not have a single app on it, but I tell you right now, AT&T knows everywhere I've been. For that phone to work, somebody has to know something about you.
So, I think my response to that would be, in any application, it depends on who needs to actually see the data. If there's someone in between who doesn't need to see the data and you manage keys properly, you can send the data encrypted and they'll know that the data exists, but you can hide the contents of the data. But if AT&T is giving you a service and they say, I'm not going to give you a service unless I can see what that piece of data is, it's going to be pretty hard to hide what cell tower you're using from AT&T.
So this is why I said what I said about the honest but curious, right? So your service, if you want to have a secure system, you store your data with provider X. You ideally would make sure that even if provider X were curious, they wouldn't be able to find out. And there are techniques for doing that. They just tend to be expensive.
Okay, so I have a question for Jaeyeon. So have you explored turning your tools into control for users? So rather than just providing feedback, to what extent can you extend those tools so that individuals could maybe do something about it?
Very good question. So I actually explored this control idea for Android apps, and then we had a paper at CCS, I think in 2010, about this. So the thing is, if you want to impose controls on existing applications or services that don't inherently support this kind of controls, then the application will break, right? Then it will impact the usability of the app and so on. So, you can do this. There are many ways that you can either block the exfiltration of data by doing some kind of information flow tracking on the device, and then blocked whenever you see the sensitive data going out somewhere that you don't want the data to go to. And then also you can do this kind of control at the inputs to the application, meaning you can sort of, rather than giving this sensitive data to application, you can give some kind of subset of data or shadow data or whatnot, so that you can sort of test out whether what applications are doing with this data. We still use application without revealing real data about it. So there are many ways that you can do this, but the problem is they will break a lot of existing applications, and then it's really hard to fix this. So I think, to me, so that's kind of, I guess, my poor attempt to talk about this kind of better permissions. So rather, currently the problem is mobile platforms, they support, especially Android and Windows Phone, all or nothing permissions. The application developer, they declare that, to run this application, I need your location, your contacts, and everything. And then all users can do is either accept all or don't use the application. So this ultimatum is really bad. And then there are lots of studies, I'm sure the economists out there, they did studies about this ultimatum, and then they show that this first mover has an advantage. And then I think that's what we see in the applications. So that's really bad. So I'm really hoping that these platform providers will fix this so that users can sort of selectively turn on and off these permissions. But it's really hard to convince platform providers to change this because they care about developers a lot. That will make this developing applications more complicated because these developers have to deal with this individual denial of some permissions, right? So, so there's that problem. I don't know whether I could answer your question.
Okay, so do we have more questions? Nope. Well, then let me just pass the microphone to David.
Thanks, Andrés, for the panel. Thank you to the panelists. That was a lot of fun. I must say, I'm feeling a little like Ushu, sort of depressed at the end of the day. It was these really hard problems but we can flip those around and we can be energized. These are really hard problems that we can go up and try to solve. Did you say wine? Yeah. Yeah, okay, so it's about that time of day, I think. I really appreciate... no, W-I-N-E, yes. So I appreciate you all sticking it out for the whole day. It's been a really fascinating day. It's been great to have so many people here with so many different perspectives on mHealth and the various aspects of that. I wanted to thank again Tom and Karen and Leslie and Larry for coordinating all the logistics. Thank you very much. It was great. We'll be working on editing the videos and getting those ready for release over the next few weeks. And also we have, as I mentioned this morning, session scribes who are writing up a summary of each one. And our plan is for the panel chairs to receive those actually very soon. Our goal is by the end of next week or maybe even sooner. The panel chairs will then work with the panelists to edit those and make sure that they are a reasonable, correct summary of the panel sessions. And the reason we're working on a fairly tight timeline is that we want to get it to IEEE Security and Privacy Magazine by the end of May. Kelly is, I believe, the editor of a column that is offered to, assuming we do a good job, maybe publish the summaries in that magazine, which would be great. So we're working on her timeline, and we'll be working as fast as we can. I just wanted to know if people thought this was useful and whether we should maybe think about doing another such workshop in a year or two. What do people think? Would that be helpful? Okay, maybe, yeah, good. Sounds promising. Well, if you have thoughts on that, please send them my way. Yeah, how much did you have? How much? Right. Great. Okay. Thanks. I'm trying to think if I have any other announcements. I am told that if you want to recycle your badge, there's a box outside the door where we can keep those and use them for another day, presumably with somebody else's name in it. But you can keep the contents as a souvenir. Any other announcements? Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.